Hi, so if you are already having Clifton Douglas prepare your tax provision and or your tax return, then certainly there's another service that we provide that we call tax department outsourcing that acts as a tremendous adjunct to both of those provision and return services. It can act as a full outsourcing department to companies who have a relatively lean tax department currently, and it can be very cost effective rather than creating a whole separate tax department inside the company itself. And the way it works is typically we start with a pool of hours that the company draws from, but depending on what services they need from their tax department from Clifton Douglas. And that pool of hours can change, it can increase and decrease depending on what the company's needs are. And we try very hard to work with a company in order to customize a tax department outsourcing process and list of activities that will of course benefit the company, but very customized to what their needs are. And it's always changing. It's a living document. We have times where clients call us saying, hey, we've grown quite a bit, so we're going to need this additional service, and we're like, fine, we'll just increase your pool of hours and account for it accordingly. Or we have the other scenario in which case companies call and say, well, you know what, I think we're going to change our operations. We don't really need this any longer, and so we adjust accordingly and reduce those pool of hours. And basically we assign a standard hourly rate to each hour that's expended, and it works out very well. It's a very efficient way for a company to obtain a full tax department without necessarily having to create internally a full tax department and go through all of that time-consuming effort as well as cost. So really, with respect to our tax department outsourcing at Clifton Douglas, we relate those services to really three main areas. One being tax provision preparation, the other one being tax return preparation, and of course then special projects. So the tax department outsourcing that relates to tax provision preparation deals a lot with respect to information gathering, and this really helps out multinational companies tremendously, in which case you need to deal with all of the foreign managers and the foreign controllers in order to obtain the necessary data to include in preparing the tax provision. And so that's where Clifton Douglas oftentimes adds a lot of value to companies. They step in and we essentially work with the foreign controllers, we work with the foreign managers to get that data so that the company doesn't have to go through all that administration. And then we also help instruct the foreign controllers and the foreign managers in terms of what types of information we need and how we need to actually receive that information to roll that into the tax provision as efficiently as possible. Also, Clifton Douglas, in terms of the tax department outsourcing, is very helpful with respect to kind of the back end of the tax provision in terms of assisting clients in really utilizing that tax provision in terms of watching their company grow and strategically helping their company to grow. And we do this by including or pulling from the pool of hours to in fact prepare effective tax rate forecasting, various tax benchmarking, really anything, any types of analyses or memoranda or preparations that need to be done in order to, even valuation allowance release memoranda, those types of things that need to be done in order to assist a company in growing and to moving forward and looking at projections and seeing what the impacts are going to be from a tax perspective. Really kind of more of a management tool. And we can do this by, again, having the company pull from this pool of hours as necessary. So it may be a situation in which case the company has a huge acquisition that's coming down the line, or a divestiture or an IPO, in which case they're going to need to pull quite a bit from those pool of hours because they're going to need a lot of work from us. And then the opposite is true. Maybe it's a situation in which case the company is pulling back a little bit because of the economy. In that situation, they have the flexibility to not be tied to an internal, very costly, very time-consuming tax department, but instead all they need to do is work with us to basically reduce that pool of hours because they no longer need it. And then of course when things change, they can increase the pool of hours. It creates this huge amount of flexibility to allow a company really to have as much tax department as they need, depending on their needs and depending on their company's overall growth. So it's very effective in terms of that tax provision aspect. Also, tax department outsourcing is very helpful with respect to tax return preparation for much of the same reasons. One of them is with respect to information gathering. Instead of having the company go through and gather all this data that's necessary for all these returns, instead Clifton Douglas can pull from, or the company can pull from their pool of hours and have Clifton Douglas come out and gather the data necessary for preparing the returns, so the company doesn't have to deal with that. They don't have to take care of that. Also, with respect to notices, especially when you're dealing with very sophisticated companies that are very large and operate in many jurisdictions, you're going to have an extremely large number of notices typically, because you're dealing with federal, many states, and then foreign at times, and many different schedules, many different complex schedules. So we've developed notice trackers that we can use to help companies understand what notices have come in the door, what action was taken, whether or not they've been resolved, or whether or not additional work needs to be done on them. Also, with respect to just organizing the company's tax function in terms of critical dates for the entire year is very effective, and we work very well. We've put together many schedules that really allow company management to understand well in advance when the due date is for the information request related to the tax provisions, when data has to be received by the foreign controllers, when data has to be received by the domestic tax managers, when in fact the returns are due, when estimated payments are due. All of these critical dates, they're all lined out, which really helps the company in terms of managing its overall tax function without necessarily having a full-on tax department. We will also go in and file various informational returns like foreign bank account returns. We'll prepare Delaware franchise taxes. We will deal with indirect taxes in terms of preparation or calculation, and then also dealing with those notices in terms of sales use tax, property tax, payroll tax, and so on. So there's a tremendous amount that we can do with respect to tax department outsourcing from a tax return perspective as well, that helps companies tremendously and allows for, again, this flexibility such that if, as the company changes, they aren't kind of stuck with this huge tax department. Their tax department can change along with the company changes just by adding or decreasing their pool of hours that are related to their outsourcing agreement with Clifton Douglas. So it's very helpful. It's a very helpful means of having, kind of your cake and eating it too, in terms of having a very broad expertise in terms of your tax department, but not having the cost and the real rigidity related to having a very broad internal tax department. So then also with respect to special projects, tax department outsourcing plays a critical role. And in our previous videos, we've mentioned that Clifton Douglas can jump in with respect to these high-level reviews when it comes to typical analyses related to R&D credit analyses, 382, 383 tax attribute limitations, state-related issues, and then foreign issues to a certain extent in terms of transfer pricing and permanent establishment, but those tend to be, in general, pretty complex. And even when the complexity of these tax projects reaches the level to where the company needs to engage a third party, be it the audit firm, because the studies are typically not restricted services, or another tax service provider, then certainly we can facilitate, because one of the big issues with respect to preparing these large credit studies, and not credits, or credit studies including all other studies, is that the audit firm or the tax service provider preparing the study needs to obtain the data requested in a timely manner and also in the format in which they've requested it. Well, we've worked so much with the audit firms, we've worked so much with other tax service providers, and have worked directly on these types of projects that we can act as a facilitator to help the company by gathering the data that the audit team or that the tax service provider needs to put together the study in the format that they request. And oftentimes it takes quite a bit of work to reformat schedules that the company has to make them fit with the needs of the actual people that are performing the studies. So that can be time consuming, but certainly Clifton Douglas, once again, the company can pull from its pool of hours, and Clifton Douglas can take care of gathering all that data, reformatting all that data, and working to get it over accurately to the audit team that's in fact completing the study, or another tax service provider. So we're very helpful in terms of a special project perspective in light of tax department outsourcing. So again, the objective of this video is really to let companies and our current clients know that a nice adjunct to the tax provision services that we provide, as well as the tax services or tax return services that we provide, is of course this tax department outsourcing, in which case Clifton Douglas steps in, creates this pool of hours customized to a company's needs, and really eliminates the need for such a large, expansive internal tax department, which frees up a lot of the company's valuable resources and valuable funds, and allows for flexibility as the company changes year over year. So it's a very effective tool. If you'd like to know more about our tax department outsourcing, then certainly you can give us a call, or you can reach us at cliftondouglas.com. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Take care.